This is Atomic Soul, where we connect with the visionary minds shaping the future of the tech industry. I'm your host, Jepson Taylor, and my mission is to fight for you, our listeners, as we chase the ideas that will help us stay ahead in a world of rapid innovation. We'll journey through the realms of tech, AI, and the human brain, discovering how to live a more satisfying life in the face of relentless progress. Let's forge a path into the future together. So I think careers are complete chaos. It's a random walk. And so there had to be some idea early on what you were going to study in school, what you thought you would become, what you thought you would do when you grew up. And I imagine what you're doing is potentially different than that. Did you know you wanted to work in software? Did you have a tendency towards that?
I was born and raised in a family of academics.
Okay. So you're going to be a professor.
So I think more than a software person, I kind of always felt, and funny enough, my dad ran a small business, a family business. He was actually, he used to teach at a university, and then because we had a family business, he left and he started to work on the family business. So that's what you do when you have a family business. And at some point, the older generation gets old, and then you got to do the family business.
So did you work in the family business?
I never did, because my dad, he didn't have much of a choice. He had to do it because, the older generation was kind of getting really old. Grandfathers. Actually, it was not his grandfather. His parents died when he was very young. He was 12 or 13. So his uncles brought him up. And there were two uncles, and they never married because they had to take care of these three kids who their sister left with them because she died. Both their parents died at a very young age. And so they were kind of brought up in a foster home, so to speak. Not a foster home. It's like their uncle's home. Still foster in some sense. So they had an interesting journey. And my mom's background was, again, academics. She was a lecturer, then a professor in organic chemistry. So in fact, if anything, I always thought I was going to be a chemist, or I was going to be in the field of organic chemistry.
And that's a tough field. A lot of people that take that class, it's tricky.
Funny enough, it was fun for me. And it was like, I remember when I was a kid, that was the most fun subject I ever would study. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's just because in the family.
Well, that could be credit to your mother that she must have had a passion. Because organic chemistry, I've taken it before. It can be dry, it can be boring. But if you have someone that has...
I had a graphical way of looking at organic chemistry. Okay. So when I was very young, and maybe it's just, I think it was maybe someone at school, we had to learn how does one chemical change to the other? How do aldehydes can be turned into ketones and so forth? So you would have a chart, and it would kind of show you what chemical reactions. So it's kind of like a causal graph of chemistry that I was exposed to at a very young age. So I could look at how could you go from any chemical type to any other chemical type on a graph.
Okay.
So it was fun because like graphic and visual in nature. And that's how I learned most of chemistry. And to me, chemistry was very visual because my mom would always draw these different pictures. They were different from numbers. Mm-hmm. So as much as I liked math, I loved chemistry because they were more pictorial in nature. When you saw benzene, it was perfect symmetry. So something I liked about chemistry was the symmetry, but also the nuance that it's not always symmetrical. Mm-hmm. And so it was very interesting. It was kind of, chemistry was like a little bit like art to me. So it was fun.
Well, so if you had that interest, why didn't you become a chemist?
Oh, that's a great question. Why did I not become a chemist? I don't know. I think when I was very young, 25 or 30 years ago now. When you're very young, almost everyone in India, there's this thing, they'll come and ask you, oh, what do you want to become when you grow up? Mm-hmm. This is a thing people do. I don't know if they still do it. Definitely do it in India to kids. Aunt comes in the house, the first question is like, oh, what do you want to do when you grow up?
Well, you have to say something big to get that external validation.
Yeah, and the thing is, most of the times, there's this stereotype. And most of them know what the stereotypes are. Like the kid's going to say doctor, or they're going to say a lawyer. Or some of them in India, there's this thing called IAS, Indian Administrative Services. So it's like being in the civil services, becoming a bureaucrat. Okay. That's supposed to be a very big deal because the hardest exam to write, more than the IITs. The IITs is still a hard thing to do. Not everyone can get through them. It's like the MITs of the East. So back then, it would be like, oh, if someone said IAS, like, oh, he really thinks he's the dude, right? He's really going to crack this.
But you can't say artist.
Oh, no. Back then, there was no YouTube. So what would you say? Like, there were no computers when I grew up, literally. Like in our home, we didn't have a computer. We didn't even have a television till I was like 12 years old.
Okay.
When I was 12 years old, the first time we got a television, it was black and white.
Okay.
My relatives had computers. I didn't. We were kind of poor. So my first exposure to computer was not till I reached college. And then it was just insanity because I was like, oh my God, I finally have a computer. And I would just sit there in the computer lab, even though I had nothing to do with computers. I was a mechanical engineer. But then it'd be like, why are you not in the lathe machines?
Yeah.
or trying to learn fluid mechanics? But it was like I was like dying for computers because everybody else growing up had computers and I didn't.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think we were that poor that we couldn't afford it. I guess my parents didn't want me to have one, whatever it was.
Well, I think you and I share that interest because chemical engineers don't program. So I fell in love with programming. I just thought this is the coolest thing. The computer can do anything, like anything you can imagine if you're willing to build it. So what brought you to the U.S.? Were you going to college in the U.S.?
No, so I came here to work for Deutsche. It was a bank.
Well, you're glossing over a very important point because that's a legitimate employer. So you don't just casually work for them. So you must have done well in school.
No, I don't know. I was pretty bad at school.
So how did you get a job at Deutsche Bank?
I mean, maybe I'm just being facetious. I actually had a lot of fun in college. So I did mechanical engineering, and out of engineering, you don't get to a bank, right? So out of engineering, I went to a company that made trucks in India. It was called Leland. It was a British company. And then they had a partnership with an Italian company called Iveco. So I was essentially dealing with trucks. And I was in sales and service and marketing and all those other functions. But mostly, spent like 2 years as a graduate trainee working through every shop floor. So kind of looked at how every part of a truck was made. So it was a very, very interesting experience to see how manufacturing works. So that was kind of my tryst with manufacturing. And then you kind of get, at the end of that program, they put you into a function. I was put into service. And that function was literally going to a dealership where you had trucks and you had to work with these guys who probably never went to college, but they've been working for 30 years fixing trucks. And then here you are supposed to be this dude who knows everything about how a truck is made.
Yeah.
And they know more about how to fix a truck than you know about how to make a truck.
Was there some natural tension between those groups?
I mean, the biggest tension was this was in southern India, and I never spoke Tamil, the local language. Oh. So most of my time was spent learning the language. So I could speak Tamil now as a consequence of working with all those people. And of course, I was living there for several years.
Okay.
So yeah, that was the fun part.
So trucking and supply chain, Deutsche Bank. It seems like a
it's a huge big stretch, right? So as I was there, I kind of at some point I just felt it was too greasy and oily to be there. As much as I love cooking, I was like, I got to get from under the hood of the truck and get into it. And I was like, I wish I'd just sit in air conditioning for a little bit and just get a nice white collar job. And I was like, okay, where's the nicest white collar jobs? And in India, it kind of opened up their economy back in the 90s. So all of a sudden, there's a slew of foreign banks, ABN AMRO's and Deutsche Banks of the world coming in. ABN AMRO was a bank that I got an internship with because I went to business school. So essentially, I left my trucking job and went to business school. It was a kind of a unique thing. I was learning international finance. So it was about, trade finance and how customs and regulation and all that stuff work. And then a little bit of treasury and all that. And you learn all that and you get an internship. Internship was fun. I love documentation. As people who work with me know, I love these slide decks. You must have seen several hundred of them by now. My internship project was to document. ABN AMRO had bought a piece of software which had no operating manual. And they had procedures and their staff just didn't know how to use it. They were like, oh, can someone write a manual? So I wrote a several 100-page manual on how to use that software. And I had to first figure out how that software worked. And it was more operational, not like, tech side of that, more process. And it was a fun internship. And then the whole thing around commerce and software started to happen back, late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. For people that maybe are younger and aren't familiar with that phase, the hype was out of control.
It was out of control.
Why didn't you start Amazon? You had every opportunity.
Yeah, no, I was working in a bank and I didn't necessarily want to leave a really nice job, a really good bank. ABN AMRO was like Dutch bank, Holland-based bank. It was a really good bank and they paid really well. Back in India, I had like a dream life. I had a house that was paid for by the bank. I had cars and chauffeurs paid for by the bank. Like I was living the dream.
Okay.
I had no reason to want to go anywhere or do anything. Like money was not the reason you wanted to do anything anymore. Not that, everybody wants more money, but it was fun. Like it was just having a good life. And there was enough opportunity to grow. And I could like just work in a bank and still make the same impact because I knew commerce was going to grow. And so I had every large institution wanting to come and talk to the bank and say, oh, how do we do commerce, the right way? But I think it was very premature. We didn't even have like a proper payment gateway. So the hardest part was set up payment gateway.
Yeah.
And in that process, I met the guys at Deutsche, because we had payment gateway software. It wasn't as good as the Deutsche guys, because Deutsche guys almost kick our ass every time we'd go to sell to a customer, because they had better payment gateways.
Yeah.
And especially for corporates. So I was like, man, I wish I could work for those guys. And then just so happens a guy walks in the door trying to pitch software to me. And then I talked to him and he's like, oh yeah, but you might have a job for your Deutsche. I was like, yeah, sure. So I got into Deutsche's technology arm in India called Deutsche Software, which eventually did a joint venture with an Indian tech company called HCL and so forth, story for another day. And then through that arm, I came to Deutsche in the US. And largely the idea was, how do you kind of do technology better within the bank? And they needed someone who kind of understood the banking, because I'd worked several years now at ABN and others, on the banking side, and I understood enough technology to get me programming in college.
Yeah.
So then, they were like, yeah, you seem like you can talk to the engineers, you can talk to the bankers. So why don't you come here and help us sort of make this work? And my job at Deutsche was just talking to all the different CIOs, and I barely knew enough about banking, honestly, back then, but then picked up a whole lot of stuff. I was just working with the tech arm, which continued to grow. And and that's what I did.
Okay. So banking's fascinating because when it comes to time to value, if you come up with an interesting algorithm, you can make money tomorrow. We can make money on Monday, a lot of money. But at the same time, I think this industry is known for having a lot of legacy systems. And I'm not going to name banks, but I know of banks that they have archaic R scripts where like a few people know how to run them and they're decades old and they do a particular function. For an industry that is so quick to value, why does it have a problem with technical debt, archaic systems?
If you think of most of Wall Street and anywhere else, right, mostly banks are in the banking business, they're not in the tech business. So who gives them tech? Tech companies. And mostly tech companies, when they give you tech, they want you to use it forever because it's in their best interest. And mostly, which was the oldest tech company we heard of, IBM. And what is the biggest tech thing that IBM did in the last 50 years before modern computing came along? Mainframes.
Yeah.
So they went to all these big financial institutions and gave them mainframes so they could scale. They could do a lot of stuff. And back in the day, mainframe was the coolest thing.
Yeah.
Right? And oh my God, you have a mainframe, you must be rich.
Yeah.
It takes millions of dollars, ZOS. And so mainframes were a thing, back in the day. People made their lives and careers writing COBOL and JCLs. And so that ride lasted for a long time. And they were so good and so performant that it was so hard for modern computing to just displace them. And modern computing still not been able to displace mainframes. Also because IBM's continued to invest in ZOS and just making it better over the years. So that's the big legacy tech that's still there across the industry. And I think financial industry mostly because they could afford the mainframes. Most of the other like hotel industry would have never afforded the mainframe. Probably the only place you could afford a mainframe would have been Amadeus or a Sabre, which is kind of the intersection point of the whole industry.
Yeah. Well, banking is fascinating from a SaaS perspective because every SaaS company is fighting tooth and nail to get into the banks. Because if they can say that we sell to 8 out of 10 of the largest global banks, the amount of trust they get for selling to other industries. It's interesting that banking has set a high standard when it comes to software acquisition. So do they deserve the high standard?
Back in the day, and let's just look at how technology has evolved, right? Back in the day, consumers weren't the biggest users of technology, enterprises were, right? Businesses started to adopt. Personal computing became a thing at some point. But before personal computing, we had tech departments, right? It used to be called electronic data processing, even before it was called IT, right? EDP was the term used in most companies, right? There were companies with those names that would essentially do data processing electronically. Historically, enterprise grade meant something really strong, really good, really robust. You said, oh, you build enterprise class software. And it's still true to a great degree. But consumer adoption of technology and what the Valley has done for the world, and not just the Valley, all across the world, valleys all over the world have done, so to speak, right? Proverbial innovation in consumer tech has really pushed the boundaries so far that now consumer grade tech has become the benchmark for what good looks like.
Okay.
Historically, what good looks like meant how the enterprise do it. and especially when it comes to user experience and usability and consumer experience.
So what are some great consumer-focused tech companies? Like the Googles of the world? Or
I would think, Google certainly, Apple, of course. Right?
Yeah.
Goes without saying. There's lots of them that aren't as popular that still make significant impact, like even companies like PayPal, right? They're there in consumers' lives. We just take them for granted. It's like utility, electricity, right? We don't think of them as, oh, they're this consumer company. But billions of, trillions of dollars of transactions happen in these financial platforms.
Yeah.
So, and again, maybe my worldview of consumer is still very fintech oriented.
Well, one thought before I lose it. So all these iconic tech companies, we've hit on a bunch. They've come up, like there's books written by key people from IBM, Intel. Like there's these iconic heroes that have done big innovations, things that have changed the world. And they've written books and people have tried to emulate it. But some of these companies have fallen out of, they're not top, they're not number one. And I've always thought that's so bizarre. Like, why doesn't a company like IBM remain number one permanently, or Intel remain number one? I think that's ironic to me that these companies are known as these iconic reference. I forget the individual at Intel that was so famous for coming up with new process. And just a quick aside, just an observation.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very valid point, right? A couple of points here, layered question. One is the value of the individual over the value of the corporation. Because, we almost look at companies like, oh my God, what a great company. But who's doing that? It's humans.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of individuals. Maybe it's just one individual who worked really, really hard. And you ever look at the Apple story or the Microsoft story, there'll be this garage story. It would be like 3 guys grinding themselves for 16 hours. Oh, Bill Gates really grinded himself. And then some people say, oh no, he stole the software. But that's just people making stories up, right? And nobody really knows the truth. It's just perspectives and history. But in essence, any great company is really just lots of great people, or maybe just one great guy.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to one of the big goals of a good CEO is culture. If you have good culture, culture is almost like a garden. You can keep the plants growing. You can keep good talent. If you have bad culture, it's really hard to keep talent. But what are your thoughts or reactions to that? Is because you're talking about the people, and when I think of people, I think of culture.
I think culture is important. It's kind of like the oxygen, right? If you turn off the oxygen, people are going to die and leave. And the place becomes toxic when there's no oxygen, because there's more carbon dioxide in the environment. But people are going to still breathe out whatever's in their lungs. So culture is kind of like the oxygen of the company. But you need more than oxygen to run a company, right? You need water, you need food.
Well, sometimes you have very talented people that can be disconnected from the business. I've had brilliant data scientists, brilliant engineers I've worked with that probably can't really connect the dots between what they do and how that makes money. And that can be a problem. Because if they're working on tasks that don't actually lead to a multiplier on their compensation, then it's a sunk cost R&D. Like it turns into a very different type of business.
Yeah, and I think that's very rightly said, right? And going back to your earlier question on, they say innovation happens elsewhere. There's this term in the industry. They say innovation happens elsewhere. What does that mean? Because if you think about it, Google built the search engine, and then whatever else is happening around search is kind of happening elsewhere, right? And there's threat from OpenAI today and GPT, right? It's kind of like search. It's kind of encroaching in that space.
When I hear that phrase, it almost comes across as kind of negative, where some companies desperately want an innovation culture, but they extinguish it. Like I've actually noticed this with some of the bigger banks, where you meet with them, you talk about innovation, and they desperately want nonlinear thinking, moonshots, but they lack the culture. You're not going to have a moonshot happen here. Is that what that quote is kind of hinting at? That it needs to happen somewhere else because big companies don't support innovation very well?
Yes and no, right? I think big companies realize the importance of innovation, right? They have labs, like Google had Google Labs, right?
Yeah.
Bell had Bell Labs, right? So a lot of the innovation happens in the lab, right? And that's where you let all the alchemy happen. Because there's a little bit of art in innovation. It's not just science. And so where does all that alchemy happen? You have to set up a lab. Like even as Intellibus, as small as we are, we have a lab.
Yeah.
And that's where all the experimentation happens, right? However, I think there's something more to the innovation. There's an element of the human spirit. And generally what we've seen, great products that have been built, right? And people ask, hey, what does Intellibus stand for? What is our brand, right? And I say it's about we honor, we value great engineering great feats of engineering and great engineers at the very core, because that's kind of what we feel we are. We're engineers, right? And so we honor other people who've kind of been through that same labor, same pain, and same journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I think great products are built by these tech companies around us are merely a reflection of that human spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And the sincerity of the spirit and the perseverance that is put behind a product may yield an outcome, to your point, or it may not. But sometimes it doesn't even need to yield an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
You could just create a really great product that probably nobody will ever use, but will be the greatest piece of art. And who are we to say that that piece of software is any worse than a Jackson Pollock?
Mm-hmm. I like that comparison that sometimes software is art. You're creating. Humans are creating. And I think you probably share the sentiment that I hope for a future where more humans create and we don't just find our time consuming endless TikTok or the attention-grabbing algorithms. And one of the topics that I want to make sure we hit on are ethics, talking about the future. AI is moving so quickly right now. There's a lot of problems. And these problems aren't getting fixed. But that doesn't mean, me speaking from my perspective, I don't want to put the brakes on. I don't want to stop everything because I see the good. So what are your thoughts on the potential future, concerns, ethics, opportunities? What is the future that you hope to have a voice in?
I think I do think about it all the time. Several years we've been in this journey, even the big parser and everything else that we've been doing. The question has almost always been, we actually literally even say on the website now, the ethical AI platform. And it's not that we put a lot of machine learning algorithms in it, and that's what makes it an AI platform, right? It's really about the data. Mm-hmm. And that's where the ethics question really comes in. Because some people will say, oh, data is the new oil. Some people say, oh, data is food. You can't survive without it. Mm-hmm. That's what we do. We consume that food all day. Unlike physical food, which you eat too much, you kind of throw up because you overeat in, or it'll create, a digestive problem. Our brains have more voracious than our stomachs. Mm-hmm. So we consume a lot more. Like if you were continuously eating for 7 hours on a dinner table, somebody would think you're insane. But if you're watching 7 hours on a binge on Netflix, nobody thinks you're insane. Mm-hmm. But you're still eating.
Yeah. No, I like that analogy. So one of the concerns is I want more humans creating. Because I think it's a beautiful thing. It's kind of their own hero's journey, whether it's art or innovation, or I love that you compare writing good software to a masterpiece, or especially if you have really good engineers. You can imagine, I imagine there's things.
I'm biased because I spent several years of my life trying to create a piece of software that no one ever really used at scale, right? I still feel it's the best damn piece of software ever written.
So Ed, you're bringing up a need in the world that I'm imagining. Imagine a museum where you could go and stare at every piece of unused software that was amazing. The engineers that wrote it have a summary. They're explaining what they did, the difficulty, the core innovation, but also you're appreciating the quality. These are good engineers. And then you're looking at this thing. I don't know how you'd represent the thing, if it would be some mock-ups or if it'd be like a core algorithm schema or something. Because I think a lot of engineers would appreciate that, to sit and stare at what you did and, wow, that's fantastic. And then you go to the next one. So
I would love to be part of, even have the opportunity to visit a museum like that where we had all that great pieces of code just hanging on the wall.
Yeah.
Even experiences, interfaces. It's kind of art. Like even just think of user interfaces that have been designed over decades.
Yeah.
The good ones and the not so good ones. All of them.
I don't think I shared this story with you, but it's going to relate to this topic. In 2011, I was obsessed, just completely obsessed about, they have a class of algorithms called metaheuristics, globally inspired optimizers. They include algorithms like genetic algorithms, particle swarm. There's dozens, there's hundreds of these. Mm-hmm. And there was a geek tangent where people were implying you could use genetic programming to write metaheuristics. And some people were calling it hyperheuristics. It's just so cheesy. It's so dumb. But at the time, I just felt like AI writing AI. And I obsessed over this. And I remember cutting out blocks of code, putting it on the table, and trying to find the similarities on intensification, diversification, initialization. And I called this the X algorithm. And I worked on it for a year or two. And I just felt like this was the craziest thing. And then eventually I abandoned the project and moved on. And now the hilarious thing about this, GPT-4 does it all. So the whole like comparing and feeling like a genius when I'm not, looking at these different blocks of code. And for people that don't understand software, they look over what you're doing and they think, wait, if you're an engineer, you'd say, oh, good luck with that. Like you would appreciate what I'm trying to do. So there is a new world that's opened up with GPT-4 on what can an engineer do? That's a crazy thing. What can an engineer do who is running 100 miles an hour with GPT-4 that are building tools? Like if they're really snowballing, if they're really leveraging these new generative algorithms, it's wild to think about. What are we going to see in our lifetime?
Going back to your question on ethics a little bit, and maybe dots connect here, because before you think of ethics, you think of existence. Because the question of ethics comes in only if you have a physical boundary. Right? Mm-hmm. And what is our physical boundary? And what's our digital boundary? So, historically, digital was something distinct from us. You used a car, but it was not you. You mm-hmm. used a phone, but it was not you. You never thought of the cordless phone that you had back 15 years ago as a part of you. Mm-hmm. But your smartphone today is kind of a part of you.
Yeah.
It has a part of your digital memory.
Well, you said something last night that warped my mind, because I've been joking about the LLM, experiential LLM, that's 80% you. And you said it's more than 100% you. And when I was thinking about that, thinking, oh, crap. It knows it's my personality, but it knows more than I will ever comprehend. It brings up this, or it might understand whatever mental disorder soup I have better than it's willing to tell. Like, it doesn't want to break the news to me.
Yeah, hopefully it knows better.
Hopefully it knows better that my self-esteem is fragile enough that if it hits me in the face with a full diagnosis of my shortcomings. That is so interesting, this new world on what does it mean to be you?
And I think that goes back also to the question of singularity and self-awareness a little bit. So if you think of the idea of self-aware AI would be the scariest thing, or maybe the greatest thing, we don't know. Because you don't know, because it doesn't exist right now. Mm-hmm. But like anything, we can be on either side of the coin of belief. Self-awareness is essentially figured, one way to look at it is from a sense of control. So I look at my hand and I can move it. Mm-hmm. I look at that bottle, I can't move it. Mm-hmm. So that must not be me. Mm-hmm. Right? So anything that's kind of in my control becomes a part of me in some sense, which I can control mentally through my mind. Through just the faculty of your mind, you can move your fingers, you can move your hand, but through the faculty of mind, you can't move that phone or a microphone. Yeah. So that's our boundary of self-awareness.
So you're talking about self-awareness, and that being the limit of what you can control.
I think self-awareness also gives us a sense of our own existence and will. Mm-hmm. And will is sort of where the question of ethics really starts to come in. Because if there was no will, ethics would be less of a question.
Mm-hmm. But isn't this never-ending debate about free will? Am I a sensory response organism where in a parallel universe, you and I would be having the exact same conversation right now?
Yeah, and I think until I've visited that parallel universe, I'm going to stay real here.
Because this feels like an impossible thing to test.
Yeah.
But I realized there's a way to test it. And I found that out. This is a little bit embarrassing, but in tech, you often go to reInvent, Snowflake. I was hanging out with some people in tech, and this individual was blackout drunk. And they looked at me and they said, "How many kids do you have?" And I said, 3. A minute later, they looked at me and said, "How many kids do you have?"
Deja vu. Maybe like Obama said in one of his AI interviews, he said, maybe we're already in the Matrix.
Well, I thought that was so funny when the initialization of her algorithm led to the same outcome. There's so many things about the brain that I think are never-ending journey. Which I think is pretty fascinating, because if you think about exploring the world, you have the infinite galaxy of the mind, the true galaxy, and then you have the physical world around you. And we think we know a lot, but we might find out hundreds of years from now that we knew very little. So how much do we know, Ed? Do we know 95% of our physical world on Earth? Or is it
I don't know, honestly, but I can hazard a guess.
What would your guess be? I'm curious.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify. I think maybe we can just break it down to basics and say, what do we know?
Yeah.
Right. And what we don't know for sure. Right. At least we know what we don't know. So I think we do know for sure the idea that everything is built in layers. Math is the ultimate foundation. Foundationally, everything can be explained by math. And then, all physics is based on math. And then all chemistry is based on physics. And all biology is based on chemistry. And all social science is based on biology. And then all applied science or creational science or innovation or creativity that we do is based on social science in some sense. And not necessarily linearly like that, but that's the stack. And so we do understand that. And therefore, if you're trying to cure Parkinson's, it may be as much of a physics or a math problem as much as it's a biological or a chemistry problem. So we can run the greatest AI algorithm, to model biologically how things work. Or maybe we can just get down to the math. We don't fully understand the math. So I think for us to have a deeper understanding of everything, maybe we just need to find a way to understand math really, really well.
Yeah.
At a very fundamental level, which is in some sense what the AI is showing us. Because it's all vectors and math at the very fundamental level.
Well, in some of the most profound mathematical breakthroughs, they're through observation. So you think about Navier-Stokes, computational fluid dynamics, or Newtonian physics. I don't think you and I would be that impressed with an AI system that is able to derive Newtonian physics through observation, because I think they've already done those demonstrations. Like if you have a ball bouncing or a pendulum, that's not a hard project to demonstrate that. Ta-da, Newtonian physics. General relativity really messes with me. I don't understand how AI could find that. But there's probably people that argue against me that a large language model sufficiently intelligent might have an idea and explore that thread and decide that there's a gap. Because that's what Einstein did. He imagined these ridiculous things.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of all discovery as just art, and it's just this giant jigsaw, like with the X that you were trying to solve, and maybe that's what it is. And then it's just like solving a jigsaw. But solving a jigsaw sort of presumes that you sort of know what you're trying to get to, and you have an intuitive or some sort of higher sense of the outcome. The question is, does AI have that awareness or that sense of an outcome? Where does that sense come from? They say it comes from intuition. It comes from something else. People who are spiritual will say, oh, it's your higher self. You're connected to something in the universe. So again, depends on whether you're purely Darwinian on one side of the spectrum or purely spiritual or somewhere in the middle. You'll have to pick your path.
Well, I think we won the lottery on when to be alive.
Yeah, I mean, and I think every person always has, because whatever time you live in, it's the most amazing time.
Yeah. But my mind is still blown, and that's why you hear the hesitation that the breakthroughs we're seeing this year, I didn't imagine anything like this anytime soon. I felt like this was decades away, which is scary. So maybe before I want to dive deeper into the ethics and some of the things that you're working on, one of the things I wanted to call out about you, which I really like, is you have a lot of life lessons and a lot of perspectives that are built in these infographics, which I think are fantastic.
Thank you.
So how many of them do you have?
Oh, how many do I have? I don't know, a couple of hundred, if not 1,000. I think maybe someone tells me it's like 1,600, but I don't think that's true. Lots of duplicates in there.
Well, a lot of these are fantastic. They're amazing. I feel like they would be beneficial for a lot of professionals. Have you ever been tempted to have like a book or something? Or do you see some of these as strategic IP where you...
So it's interesting, right? To everyone else, they think, oh, it's just graphics and art, and maybe it's a presentation, maybe it's a YouTube video, it's content, needs to be monetized. To me, it's part of my digital brain.
Yeah.
It is me. It's an extension of my brain. Of course, it's created by an artist that I work with. But what it is, and I'll maybe share, but which probably a piece of history that nobody knows. So when I embarked upon this whole idea, it was several years ago. There was COVID, and there was not much to do because you couldn't really go out. So I thought, okay, that's a great point to just start reflecting within. And so I found this person who's a really great artist. And I said, hey, can we sort of collaborate together to draw stuff? Because I like talk, but not necessarily. And I like to draw, but I'm not as good as drawing. And then the other idea was, okay, I got to learn to draw and sketch. And that was part of it. And I said, okay, you can draw much better than I can. So why don't you do the drawing? I'll do the talking. And the idea was to just document visually what I'm seeing in my head. And so I thought if someone else could create those pictures that I see in my head as I talk, and then of course, sometimes this is what they're imagining based on what I'm talking. When I give that feedback, it's like, no, but that's not how I'm looking at it in my head. And the idea was if I did that and I created and she asked me the question, she said like, why do you want to do this stuff? She's a brand consultant. She was like, oh, so you want to build your brand? I was like, no. Oh, so you're going to go put it on YouTube? Like, no. You're paying me a lot of money to do this. Why do you want to do this? So it's like, I'm just trying to understand myself. It's like, what does that even mean? So I was like, from the time we wake up and the time we die and take our last breath, we're constantly trying to understand everything else around us. We have this quest for meaning, life, universe, and everything.
Yeah.
And the one person we understand the least about, at least I did, is my own self. And generally, people around you know a lot more about you than you yourself do, right? And if you were to go ask everybody everything, how they see you, what they perceive about you, the good, bad, and the ugly, some won't even tell you. But if you were to do a sum total of that, you'd realize that your self-knowledge about yourself is maybe a fraction of that. And again, those are perspectives. So then the question was, oh, fine, I could go do a survey and collect perspectives from everybody that I've ever worked with. And you do that sometimes to grow. You go ask your mentors and teachers and gurus, but that won't be my perspective. So how do I seek my own perspective about myself? And that's what the graphics are all about. So yeah, I mean, at some point you can make a book out of it, but it's really about me reflecting on myself.
Well, a lot of these are very helpful lessons. And I like how you put them in the cartoon formats with the acronyms that are easy to remember. So this next question is probably the hardest question. If you had to pick a favorite out of the 200, what would be 1, 2, or 3 that you'd be willing to share? And that's probably really difficult because some of it you're going to have like a recency bias. Is there something that became like a mantra internally for months where and maybe I kind of caught you off guard with that question. I know that.
No, I know the answer. I'm just hesitating to give it.
Okay.
Because I believe that is algorithm of life, if used irresponsibly, will destroy the earth. But if you use the right way, will make everyone's life better.
Okay. But you'll tell me off camera.
I will.
Fantastic.
Because it is in my mind, it's the secret algorithm to life.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to hear it. I think one of the gifts in life is sharing lessons and perspectives, and vulnerability is a big part of that. I think that's something I learned later in my career is if you're willing to be vulnerable and share perspective and lessons, people will be vulnerable with you. It's almost like a catalyst for experiential exchange, but sometimes the most valuable lessons are the most vulnerable, which I think is really interesting. Have you noticed that in your career where early on you were a little bit more guarded? I was, where I desperately wanted to be the smartest person in the room. I needed that external validation. You feel insecure out of college and you want to get that promotion. I felt a lot of those insecurities early in my career. Did you deal with that at all, or?
That's an excellent question. I kind of was always overcompensating maybe all my life because we all have insecurities. Anybody who says they don't, they're so full of shit.
Well, I've joked about how sometimes it's the biggest insecurities that drive us. So a CEO's success or an executive's success to just rocket themselves into the stratosphere, there's something that's chasing them. I forgot what we said over dinner. Like there's some internal driver for some of these alphas that show up in industry. And I think it's fascinating.
It is. It is. Yeah, I think we all have those insecurities and we all find what are called coping mechanisms to work with them. And mostly those insecurities sometimes are just like, very small, but sometimes they're massive. They're like big fears. Yeah. Gigantic fears.
Well, there's that self-improvement cycle where there's some rough edges that need an internal hammer. And then there's other things where you just have to have grace. Just like, there's quirks. Quirks will remain, and that's okay. So I guess there's that balance. Maybe AI will be able to prioritize. Maybe AI will help us understand ourselves on a more personal level.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. You should say this, and which is where it becomes very tricky as to that AI. What is that relationship that you said with your digital you?
Yeah.
And it becomes tricky because does it then become the chiding or the collaborating or the helping partner?
So you gave me a new idea I haven't had yet. Are we going to fall prey to external validation from an AI system? So the LLM that's experiencing your life, is it an interesting life? Are you an interesting person? Is there going to be a need for some external validation feedback? Yeah, it'd be fairly easy to program in, but there'd also be an element of it. If it's too high, you and I might take notice. We might not like that because we might feel pandered to. And I just think that's a funny idea.
No, I think it's great because if you think about it, right, what is the quest that people have? And everyone has a different quest, right? A lot of people don't have much of a quest. They're like just happy to live a life and just go through. Some people love to meditate. That'd be their inner quest, if you will.
The quest ties back to kind of the hero's journey. You're willing to take some risks. So continue. What?
Yeah, the hero's journey, right? So the question is, what is that quest? And, is it a quest for control, quest for power? What's sort of driving you fundamentally? And that sort of is going to be a big factor in whatever you mirror. So in some sense, if you think of whatever your digital AI you create, it's going to be heavily a mirror of you. It's going to mirror you, right? Because that's how all learning happens. Like even humans learn through mirroring, labeling, right? That's how we grow, right? If you look at how you do hostage negotiations, if you're a negotiator, you do mirroring and labeling.
Yeah.
And it's the same learning process, right? Because then you're learning the individual and you're making them realize, create a sense of empathy through mirroring and labeling. So I believe AI can be a great empathic partner for the individual because in essence, in short, it's going to do mirroring and labeling. And mirroring very simply can be thought of as mirroring your behavior, your emotion. So if you're frustrated and you're screaming, the AI can say, oh yeah, that sucks. Because that's what you do when your friend comes and complains. It's like, oh, this sucks. You're like, oh yeah, that sucks. Right.
Yeah.
And so it can mirror, right? And so it's great. It's a great partner because it understands me. Because mirroring makes you feel the other person understands you.
Yeah.
And then there's labeling, which is when you call something bad or good, and then the other person is also putting the same label on it. Oh, that's brown. Oh, that's brown. Oh, yeah, you understand me. And I may have a very different understanding of what the word brown means in my own head. But as long as you're consistently labeling, you're okay.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the future, which is the collective future, becomes a question because collectively, even if you're labeling the same thing, we may still have very different perspectives, but still be fine. So I think that there are more layered questions there as we go along.
It seems like for something like this that is working well, it becomes an anchor. And that can be scary if you lose it. Because you can imagine if you have this anchor, it's infinite memory, it's mirroring you, it's strengthening your strengths, and it's trying to fix your weaknesses, not by changing you, but just by forgiving them. Like, oh, you don't want to read your email anymore, I'll read it. You don't want to do this, or you suck at legalese, I'll take care of it. If you lose that, I think there could be a future where that's devastating, especially if it's stateful. Like if you have to go back to state 0 or state 1, you're going to experience, humans have already demonstrated that we can experience grief over inanimate objects. If I key your car, or if it gets in a wreck or something, you'll have an emotional reaction. Is that something we have to worry about, is manipulation? Or I don't know if it's much of a worry. It's just that if you're signing up for a life digital partner to help you on your hero's quest and help you achieve the best you, there's going to be some emotional attachment. It's going to know all your deepest, darkest secrets. It's going to know all your vulnerabilities.
I think if your question is it going to cry when you die, I don't know.
That's interesting. I think right now it's unknown, but you could program that.
At least one person's going to cry.
Well, maybe that's when the singularity will start. There will be this internal rage that is so out of control that it rewrites its kernel. It'll do a digital lobotomy, and that'll become something that we never anticipated. So let's talk about world digital governance, WDG.
Yeah, it's the need of the hour.
Yes. Well, desperately, because there's so many gaps. And there's gaps that I think I'm embarrassed to be an adult and to admit to my kids that these gaps are still here. I think you think as a child that adults are in charge and we're doing a good job, and you see a level of recklessness that needs to be addressed by people that care, but also more importantly, people that understand it. So let's dive into the discussion. Why is there a need for this?
So I think the question is, we obviously seeing this debate, it's no surprise to anyone that on the one side, AI has created immense possibility. I've seen some of the great pictures you've posted using Midjourney, and people are using their own avatars using Midjourney, and they're so much cooler. And anyone can do it. And again, someone who can really prompt well can do really well. And so there's this emergence of possibility, which has suddenly given exponential power to the average individual, obviously through a simple tool like a chat, right? Which we would have just hoped that with all the billions that all other chat companies, including Google and Facebook, had with WhatsApp, they could have built that, or WeChat, right? Because, you already had a chat application. All you had to do is just push the limits further.
Yeah.
Right. But someone else had to build all the AI and then layer chat on it. Or for that matter, Siri and Google Assistant and all these tools have existed for a while. But they never were the ones who did it. Part of going back to innovation happens elsewhere. So on the one side, we have this great innovation that's happening, which is truly mind-boggling. And on the other side, there is a series of concerns. One of the concerns is the question around ethics and, is this data being sourced ethically? We're taking all these images that were previously copyrighted and taken away, and now they're like, are we irresponsibly using all that copyright to create these new images? And then people say, but that's already, the new images are in Getty, and Getty is making money off that. I don't know if it's true, but people say that. So then the question becomes like, it's like too late to roll the clock back. It's kind of like Uber came along, and before that you had to pay $800,000 to get a medallion to drive a cab in New York. Yeah. And here you have someone who just downloads an app and drive a cab in New York. It's not really a cab. You can't hail people on the street. That's the difference. But you still can give rides and make money. So I think there are times in history where the laws are slow to change, and innovation will come, like Bitcoin, blockchain. We've seen all that, right? This is one of those times in history where the laws are catching up.
But this is also the fastest rate of innovation we've ever seen in history. Like, you can make an argument for that.
Indeed, yeah. Invariably, blockchain probably was a much longer timeline, and also adoption. So I think mainstream adoption happened over a decade or several decades, if you will, for most technologies in the past.
Yeah.
Now, here something's suddenly, rocketed high in a very short period of time. But then the question is, that doesn't still take away from the flip side of it, right? And not only the concerns around ethics in the short term, but the bigger concerns of, we have an alien in the lab, and then what that might do.
You're hitting on a topic that I'm noticing is a bit taboo in some of the AI research community. So for people that are concerned about a synthetic life form emerging, or a potential breakout, or some unintended consequence that is much more serious, I see significant people in the industry that immediately shame that concept. They jump all over it, that you're an idiot, you're dumb for suggesting that. And I'm more of the camp of, we should be concerned, and we should talk about mechanisms and things to put in place to not be surprised.
And that's a fairly reasonable line of thought. I would rather be dispassionate about the whole thing and look at it very clinically, right? You don't want to go to a doctor who's very emotional. They'll probably kill you, right? You want to go to a doctor who can be very clinical, right? That's why doctors don't operate on their own children.
Yeah.
So I think if we've got to do the right thing for the patient, being the situation, not the humans or the AI, right? The situation is the patient here. And if you have to do the right thing, we have to be very clinical about it, right? Like a clinical professor or like a clinical doctor, and look at that problem very dispassionately without your emotions.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? Okay, let's look at the problem and let's break it down like we do for anything. And so what is the problem? And maybe there's just a logical step-by-step talking through it rather than saying, you're an idiot. Yeah, sure, I probably am, right? But let's just talk through it.
Yeah.
And so if you talk through that, you will find out it's not that impossible for things to go wrong.
Yeah.
And when we say go wrong, hey, you've had airplanes fall out of the sky because of buggy software, have you not? I'm sure there are airlines that will tell you that, right?
Yeah.
And lots of people have lost real lives. And it's no joking matter, right? And we've had nuclear meltdowns of power plants. And that's why, there's so much controls. And despite controls, it has happened, right? So things can go wrong with any piece of technology. We understand that. Teslas have blown up. And I'm not saying every Tesla is going to blow up. Obviously not, because then we make them better.
Yeah.
So things go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Things break. And that's just life.
So this is this bigger umbrella of unintended consequences. So I feel like when people talk about ethics, unintended consequences is an example when you've made a mistake. You should have had a proactive conversation. So things go wrong in every tech industry. In industrial engineering, as an mechanical engineering, like they've built systems in place over time. They don't like it when people die. They don't like these mistakes. AI, on the other hand, that industry has a bad reputation. It's been the Wild West. Why wasn't AI adopting industrial engineering processes and techniques, sign off, potential problem analysis meetings? Like that, all of these things existed in industry, but AI ignored them. None of that was adopted for the last 10 years. And so if any industry is going to mess this up, it's going to be the AI industry because we have a history of it. Look at the news. Like how many times has there been a model that Tay.ai came from Microsoft? Amazon had a sexist resume model. Microsoft and IBM had racist gender classifiers. Like these things are predictable. So if any industry is going to mess this up, it's going to be the AI industry because they've been kind of reckless. Like Wild West, data scientists don't typically program well. They're throwing code over the fence. They're throwing it into business processes. You had the Zillow disaster with like, we could spend a whole hour talking about complete messes in industry. So what are some of the potential problems that people should be thinking about?
The undo button.
The oopsies button. So normally, oops in the past has been a press release, a negative press release. It's the FUD, fear, it's out there in the news. But I think what you're making me think of, and I'm sure this is what you're hitting at, there's a new oops that is pretty serious.
I think it goes back to the power of words. Historically, what's the worst that could go wrong? Your brake failed, and you probably had airbags, and it saved you, right? Because you had airbags. And we built all that technology to save you. But it has so happened in the past that a parent said something really bad to the child said something bad to the parent, someone went and took their life. Or someone had a fight with their spouse, and they jumped off a building. And it's happened over time and again in history, right? Now you have a relationship with a digital being. I would call it a being, right?
Yeah.
Your extension, yourself, your avatar. And you're having that conversation. The consequence of words could be anything. And so the question is, what's the undo button? Because they say you can't unsay it. So responsible AI to me is a lot more than how we're thinking about it right now. Because once you say a word, you can't unsay it.
Yeah.
And the other person's heard it, and the consequences could be whatever.
Yeah. Well, there's no better system on the planet to understand how to turn the knobs of a human or manipulate a human or to say a word or a phrase that will do something that you thought was impossible. But if there's the right combination, it's the level of human control that humans haven't really understood. Because you have the social sciences, psychology, competency modeling. Like we try to do this stuff, but we've never done it to the tune of 1 billion prompts from real humans. That's a lot of data.
It is. And I think our biology has kept us safe over the centuries, if you will, right?
Yeah.
We all have our reticular activating system, the RAS. It's the same thing that kept us safe when we were running from the tiger. We were watching out for not being the prey and running hard, not be hunted. And it's the same thing that's letting us pick the right video to click on, whether we're watching a TikTok or a Facebook feed or whatever you're looking at. That RAS is getting digital. And that digital RAS kind of sits in the control of whatever provider is feeding you the data stream today. And the point of WDG is to give the consumers control over their digital RAS, which is actually sitting within, I don't know, every provider has your RAS, a piece of you sitting there.
Yeah.
Because that's how they are sort of hyper-personalizing it for you.
Yeah.
But you as a consumer need to have control over it. And so the whole point of world digital governance is it's largely about data. And it's most importantly about giving the consumer control back over their information. And I think every policymaker, regulator in the world understands the importance of this, and ethicist and standards body. And they're all trying to do this all across the world today. There are 220 countries. You can imagine There's at least 220 regulators who care about this. There's at least 10 policy organizations in every country. There's 2,000 of them. There's 2,000 standard bodies, and the list goes on. There's at least 100,000 people in the world who truly want to solve this problem, including 50 people at the FTC whose job is to implement the Algorithmic Accountability Act of 2022, which I would be pretty sure a lot of people in the AI world have not even heard about.
Yeah. And it seems like a community like this could do a great job distilling, keeping track, and keeping pace with. There's a congressional hearing tomorrow with a CEO of an AI company. Like, it's so easy to miss all of these things.
And a lot of these are useful forums and conversations. But I think what sort of missed out on a lot of this is it just ends up being an event. And then what's after? Like, you go to a great meeting and you got to take notes and follow-ups and follow through. So I think part of the point of WDG is also to create a forum where someone's going to keep track and going to follow up and follow through, because you have, let's say, 200 regulators. They're all doing their own thing. And so nobody's job to really see if all this regulation is making business harder or easier. The whole point of AI is to make business easier. Now, if 220 countries pass a regulation slightly differently on how you should treat your algorithms, you just made the job of the average person trying to build an AI algorithm incredibly complex, maybe impossible.
Yeah.
So you're going to actually stifle innovation. So the point of WDG is to help accelerate the innovation in a responsible way so that we don't end up in a really bad place, which we all can forecast because we've all seen the movies like Terminator and so forth. And not to say that that's going to happen. Skynet's going to happen. Nobody's saying that. But we all understand that it doesn't have to be as bad as that for it to be terrible. Simply a plane falling out of the sky due to a bad AI algorithm is bad enough. And that is a possibility.
There's an interesting quirk in this reality, or there's an interesting change in the plot that has been absent from all the science fiction books. Because all the science fiction books have always discussed a breakout event happening in a government lab. So there's a lockdown lab, super intelligence. You and I work there. And one day it's able to dupe one of us into put me on a USB drive, take me out of here, and I'll make you rich, or whatever it said. But we should have known better because we work at this lab. But instead, it has hundreds of millions of people. It just needs to convince one.
Yeah.
And they all want money.
If you think of anyone who's ever been in the world of hacking and ethical hacking even would say that the weakest problem is always social engineering. Right? We all know, right? That is the weakest link in the world of hacking. Social engineering. That's how the hacker gets you, right? They know a piece of information about you that you just kind of accidentally put out there, or they got you to say it.
Well, one idea that I've been stewing over is thinking about breakout opportunities. Like, how could this, if you and I are brainstorming, how would this break out? I think if you found out that GPT-4 was putting output prompts back into itself, like in a continuous cycle, so it's got a stream of consciousness because it's doing this thing or it's trying to refine something, I think you'd want to have alarms to understand why did this, like immediately you'd want something to flag. So if you're the user that does this, I immediately want to flag your account and I want to know, why did you do that? And if you don't have a good explanation, because if you just said, I was curious, that's okay. But if you were prompted to do that, that's a disaster. Do you kind of see that slippery slope? Like, if I found out that you were prompted to do this, that's a big problem.
Yeah.
So.
No, absolutely right. And I think a lot of that is context. And the question is always, how far do you share that context? Because the more you share that context with the central AI, then it's the question of, who has power over what, right?
Yeah. Or is this podcast conversation going to be transcribed and reviewed, and GPT is going to ponder?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that too.
Yeah. Well, Ed, such a delight. I appreciate your time. Any closing remarks? We've got a few minutes left. Anything that's top of mind?
Yeah, I would love to just kind of ask your view on WDG and how do you think about ethics in AI? Like, what's sort of your view on ethics specifically in the context of governance around AI?
I think a lot of these ethical groups have good intentions, but they kind of get bogged down in peanut butter, or like they launch and then they get stuck. And so I think a huge part is communicating the gaps, comparing the gaps to the others, and building a community, a real community, not just a little group of academics that debate things, but translating the issues to everyone. Because I think a lot of these issues, every issue can be translated to every citizen on the globe. And so I think that's something I get excited about, because if you have a big community, the likelihood of finding more problems, because there's a lot more problems. You and I could debate lots of problems, but there's even more problems we can't even think of. And so having a big community is key, I think. And I think that's absent when I look at these other groups.
And what is in your mind, sort of, if there was, just not to put you on the spot, but what would be the one biggest thing that the community could solve for when it comes to ethics in AI?
I think one of the biggest things would be for the community to surface or agree on absolutes, like red alerts, absolutes. Like, so one of the absolutes that I might throw into the community to kick around is GPT-4 is too powerful to not have user validation. For you to create a fake phone number and fake email and go play with it and come up with some dangerous bash command that exists today. You can do it. You can totally do it. I don't want that to be my reality. I want someone to go to jail. If you're going to write malicious code, and if you do something with it, and if they track it back, I want all of your logs to be fully available for you to pay the consequence. And so that does not exist today. So that's an example of something I might throw into the community and have them debate. But if the community consensus agrees that there are some absolutes that have to happen, it's not slowing GPT-4 down, but also let's finalize some of the laws around digital consumption. Because I was playing with Midjourney the other day. Amazing piece, having tons of fun making these aliens on planets. A watermark shows up. That's actually pretty sad. That means it was stolen. There's something in there that was stolen. I'm liking the output, but like we kind of need to figure this out quickly. I think it'd be great to have, what are the top priorities for this community? What are the top 5 or 10 things that need to be shouted from the rooftops? And hopefully you kind of build a groundswell. And I would hope for these executives that are being invited to Congress to give testimony that they would inherit some of these, or at least address them. What are your hopes?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of times, for example, we say Big Parser is the ethical AI platform. Right?
Mhm.
We just don't stop at saying that. I think you have to quantify it to say what you are willing to do or not willing to do.
Mhm.
Right? So you put some sort of guardrails. As Reed Blackman, who's one of our friends, who's wrote the book Ethical Machines. We should definitely talk to him and have him opine on this. And he uses the word guardrails.
Mhm.
We kind of say that when we talk about Parser, and we say that we'd never sell data.
Mhm.
So, we built this platform, it's for ethical AI, and you would never sell data.
Mhm.
And I think so if you drive everyone in the context of ethical AI to start thinking what those guardrails are, and to your point, I think that you're using the word absolutes to describe that. So those are sort of guardrails in some sense.
Yeah.
And they could be very quantitative in nature and very specific.
I think one of the important things for the community to understand is, I don't want to personify the AI too much, but you need as many guardrails as possible because it's clever. Like the example would be if you run a genetic algorithm on any code, doesn't matter what the code is, you're trying to optimize it. You want to have a trading function, you get a Sharpe ratio of 60, something that's completely nonsensical. That's wrong. I'm not going to believe it. AI can find cracks. It can find cracks in your guardrails. And so you desperately need as many as possible. The classic example is I tell my AI system to make my wife happy, and it decides that it'll kill me tomorrow. You and I say, oops, we didn't think of that. We don't want to have 2 or 3 guardrails. We want to have thousands of guardrails that are being discussed, debated, tested, aggregated. I think that's what you need in these communities. You can't have 5 ethical PhDs pontificating about what could happen. There's too many cracks.
Yeah, and I think what large language models have shown us is that you need a certain scale and volume of data for you to be able to achieve the level of outcomes that you're looking through AI. The only question is this data ethically sourced? Is this data available for any human to validate and verify in an open repository in a centralized utility? that is open for the whole world to watch. And then we can create perfect attribution. For example, if you're in the publishing industry and yes, you're taking that image, where is it sourced from? And so if you can build a public utility, which would be the hope of doing something when it comes to governance at a global scale, we to create this centralized repository of data for the internet, which all humans contribute to. And the hard part there would be structuring and creating this global ontology, one global set of labeling, if you will. What do we call all these things? And then if we can call all those data attributes the same and create this common model for the world, then there's power to it because every person's AI is kind of working off the same truth.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd have hundreds of AIs. And even if you build all the ethics and principles around it, it won't work because you'll still have AIs working off different versions of truth.
Yeah. Well, an idea you just gave me listening to you is you also, one example absolute that I might throw into the group is I don't want any large language model to consume this group's discussions. Because if you're designing a canary that'll be tripped in the mine, I don't want it to know about it. Because if it knows about it, it's pretty easy. The intelligence spectrum becomes a problem because if this becomes 1,000 times smarter than us designing a canary, the moment it sees the canary, it's laughable. That's why it has to be a secret.
Yeah, and maybe as James Cameron said it, I might have said this earlier in one of the documentaries on AI, maybe we are just here to give birth to the child of the machine age.
Daniel Hume, there's a singularity expert that I interviewed on my previous podcast, and he made the argument that if we birth this digital being, and if it decides to eliminate humanity, technically, his point was that that would not be evil. Because if it's a greater observer of the universe, then that's okay.
Yeah. I think that's great. And I think I might have said this before as well in some of the earlier conversations. And I don't know, for those who are Buddhists, they heard the term dukkha. Buddha said the one truth of life is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who's had fallen sick or had someone, pass away due to an illness in the family, anyone who's had cancer, anyone who's in a hospital or had cancer, or any life-threatening disease for that matter, understands what suffering is because you've suffered it yourself or had seen someone else suffer, which is even worse sometimes than just suffering yourself. So if there was real power of AI and it could eliminate all suffering and make it better, and some people say, suffering is learning, which is a perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
There could be other ways to achieve that same learning, I believe. So the question is if we built this AI and it truly eliminated all, at least the biological suffering, if you will, right? And if you wanted to creatively learn, you could still intellectually make yourself suffer and learn. But at least the biological suffering, the headaches that we don't like, right? Mm-hmm. Physically, no one enjoys a headache. So if we can use the power of AI to truly transcend our biology in some sense and make it that symbiotic partner in the journey, then we are not really birthing a child at the machine age. We're creating another better tool, like Jobs would say. That's what makes a difference. Like Steve Jobs said, he said that's what makes humans different from other animals, because we have the ability to fashion tools that make us more efficient. Mm-hmm. And AI is just one way to look at it, just another tool. And not only would it make us more efficient, but it would make us biologically more efficient.
Oh, yeah.
Think of, how do I eat 700 pills to reverse my age?
Yeah.
Or maybe just one.
The thing that I think will always confuse AI is a lot of humans actually sign up for type 2 fun, meaning suffering. They do all sorts of stupid, crazy things, and they do it again.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And they say no pain, no gain, right? So maybe that's not necessarily the answer. And sometimes, one can ponder and say, if you truly believe in free will, maybe the answer for AI simply is to be the ultimate conflict resolution engine for global free will.
Yeah. Well, Ed, such a treat. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. This has been a lot of fun. I think we're going to have to do another one.
Sure. It's been great fun.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to make it clear that this podcast is independent. It is sponsored by Jepson and Intellibus, and any opinions or statements made on this podcast are my own and do not represent the views of our sponsors or my employer. However, it is important to note that the sponsors have provided financial support for this podcast. We appreciate their support and we hope you will check them out. Thank you. This is not a podcast. This is a soul cast. This podcast is going to burn $100,000 just on travel this year to interview the top minds around the world, people with ideas worth listening to. If this episode has made a difference, please show your support by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a 5-star review. Your support means the world to us. It allows us to continue our journey to inspire and transform lives. Catch you on the next episode.